Uh, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What an amazing pleasure to have you all here. My name is Tebogo Mwalusi. I am the national spokesperson of Rise Mzansi. Today is an amazing milestone in our journey where we get to start thinking and grappling with our policies and ideas and solutions for South Africa. I think it goes without saying that the mere existence of Rise Mzansi is in response of a crisis that we face. And our idea of getting out of that crisis is to be coordinated and very effective in the way that we respond to the crisis. So we are here to listen, to contribute, and to shape a future together. Before I continue any further, just wanted to introduce the rest of our team, and then we'll get into some of the housekeeping rules. Let me start by first introducing on the far left, Vuisa Ramokgopa, who's our national chairperson. To her right is our head of policy, Mandla Isaacs, and then we've got our national leader, Songezo Zibi. In the room, we also have Mabine Siabe, who's our director of communications. He's the gentleman who'll be taking beautiful pictures of you. Do smile, look happy to be here. It helps for the content. Um, just in terms of some of the rules for this afternoon or evening at least, bathrooms are, as you exit the doors, you go all the way to the right-hand side. You'll see them on your left. Feel free to, at any point in time, step up and get a refreshment. This will be a 2.5 hour long session, so feel free to replenish your bodies. We want your minds to be operating at an optimal level. Hopefully the water on your tables will hydrate you. It doesn't have cholera because we are Rise Mzansi. And outside of that, I think it's about making sure that we all contribute. I would love to hear every single person in this room at least share a voice because your voice matters. We talk about a listening politics, and we don't want that to be lip service. It's about a culture that we're developing, which means when people speak, how do we approach what they say, and how do we understand it, and how do we then incorporate it in some of the ideas that we have. I'm just the MC for today. I'm going to hand over to our national chair, who will essentially set the scene, and then she will be the host for the evening. But thank you very much for making it. We have started on time because that's our politics. And we love that the room is quite representative because hopefully we can get a diverse set of views from different parts of South Africa. Thank you so much and good evening. Ms. Ramokgopa.
Good evening, everyone. It's really lovely to see you all. And well done and congratulations to you for making it out tonight and for heeding the call to rise and to be part of the change that you want to see in this country. As seemingly innocuous as this event may seem, it really is the first step in authoring the new future that we want to see and in building the South Africa that we deserve. And one day, I'd like to imagine that we will look back on this day and we will look back in history and say we were there and we were part of that. And that word there in our new or revised constitution, I put that there. And that's really what this is all about to us. It's about co-authoring the South Africa we deserve and co-authoring this future that we collectively want to build together. So again, well done for being here. As the MC has already introduced me, my name is Vuisa Ramokgopa. I have nothing to do with the current state of electricity affairs. It is, yeah, long story, but I am obviously very concerned about electricity, despite the seeming abundance of electricity that we have right now. So my job here is just to give you a sense, frame the evening, You'll see that we have our head of policy here. We have our national leader, Mr. Zibi. They will largely be giving the presentations and speaking through the material and just sort of facilitating the conversation this evening. The purpose of this event is, as I've said, to one, share a bit of insight about some of the information that we've put out already, which I'm sure many of you have already engaged with because it's on our website and we've made quite a lot of it publicly available. But of course, things can get missed when they sit in documents. So really, it's about one, engaging deeper with some of the thoughts, ideas, and approaches that we've taken as Rise Mzansi. This is not a rubber stamping session. It's not simply for you to endorse what already exists. It is for you to consider and give us your feedback and your thinking around not just the contents of the document, the approach that's being taken, and how we actually are going about this whole journey. This engagement also forms part of what you will see in our discourse called the People's Manifesto process. So again, it's really not just about the politicking and the optics of politics and ticking boxes to say that we've consulted. The People's Manifesto process, as our leader Songezo pointed out yesterday in our press conference, is intended to be one of the most thorough and comprehensive citizen engagement processes that will seek to develop policies on a range of different subject matters. We are hoping that by the end of this process, which will culminate in a People's Manifesto convention come end of September, that we will have been able essentially to crowdsource our policy documents, speaking across all different topics, and that when we stand in front of South African people and articulate our vision for South Africa, that it can be something that truly resonates with the people of this country and has that fingerprint and the signature of everybody who's been part of the process. Now, obviously, we will not reach all 60 million people, but we can do our best, and we are doing our best as we travel to different towns, to different cities, to different townships, to different villages, to host these conversations, both big and small, to get the most diverse range of views. So while we are in Sandton today, don't imagine that these conversations are confined to rooms like this. They certainly are not. We have already had several such engagements in various locations. We were in Mzansi, we were in Kailicha, we've been in Tembisa, we've been in forums in Soweto, Soshanguve, various parts of our country already, and the journey continues. As I've said, this process looks to culminate in a convention that will take place at the end of September. So between now and then, we are still going to have about 40 more of these conversations, if not more. And they will be, as I said, big and small. Some of them 200 people in a room, some of them 10 people in a room. And when we talk to different rooms of people, we also talk across different constituencies. And when we say constituencies, we talk about not just geographic constituencies, but also different interest groups and people who have different needs. So we will also be meeting with organizations and different interest groups that focus on and specialize on different topics. So really, as best as possible, we are trying to be as thorough and as comprehensive as we can in the way that we approach this. So for this evening, what we are going to do is very soon I'm going to hand over to Songezo to just give us the sort of opening remarks. And then he will be followed by Mandla, our head of policy, who will kind of give you a high level sort of view of what is currently sitting in our documents. Now, just another important conceptual thing is that despite the seating arrangement This is very much supposed to be an interactive session. It's supposed to be a conversational session. It is not a Q&A. So when we do open the floor to ask for comments and inputs, the question is not what is Rise Mzansi going to do about, or why has Rise Mzansi not said anything about. That is not the nature of engagement today. As I've said to you, we have not said anything about everything as yet, and we haven't got developed positions on many things. We are trusting you in this room to bring your collective expertise and your lived experiences as South Africans who very much understand the world that we live in to give us those inputs. It does not have to be technical in nature. And I do want to say there's nobody who's like uh, more of an expert than anybody else. I think if you live in this country, if you wake up and you sleep and you eat and you breathe in this country, you have an opinion and you have a political opinion, and we welcome that opinion and we want to hear it. So I'd really like you to engage openly, constructively, of course, talk to each other as well as to the panel. And I think that's also what this is about. It's about talking to each other and engaging with some of the inputs that will also be made by some of the other people in the room today. So yeah, with that said, I'm really looking forward to the engagements. I echo Debocho's sentiments that we are excited to hear from you. We will be feverishly taking notes throughout the session. And as soon as Mandla finishes his presentation, very little more will be said from us for the rest of the evening. It will be up to yourselves to engage and give those inputs. Just as the last pointer, I just wanted to recognize another one of our recent NLC members, one of the members who's recently joined the National Leadership Collective, Mr. Dumi Mpakanyani. Dumi, please stand up. Dumi is, he's recently joined the national team. He was instrumental in helping us to draft our constitution, and he's our head of internal democracy. So as we also reflect on how we want to go about our asimshayeleni izandla bacho. Dumi Wabaji. Thanks, Dumi. You're welcome to sit down. So as we embark on the next few months, one of the other things that we're also going to be working on is our candidate selection process, and our approach to public representatives, and just mapping out the framework around that, the processes around that, because we also do have a very clear view about how we want to approach it, but with brilliant legal minds such as Dumi's, I think we are in safe hands, but we obviously also welcome your inputs around what you want to see from a candidate selection and public representative perspective, because that's also a process that we are currently underway with. So with that, I thank you, and I look forward to hearing from you for the rest of the evening. And I will invite Songezo to come up and just give us a few opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, V, and good evening, leaders. The reason I've got my phone is not for the notes, it's for a stopwatch so that I don't speak too long. So I'm timing myself. Otherwise, I could annoy you by the time this conversation really begins. So RISE is a crazy idea in a way, because one of the things I believe we didn't take further in 1994 was the idea of democratizing or building a democratic culture in South African society. And we've centered political parties so much that we treat the space of politics in its broadest sense as a buffet where you go and you pick what you like and what you don't like, but you are otherwise not involved. So there's a special breed of people that must determine what happens to the rest of the country, and we pick from the menu to see who has the best vision. And this is not entirely untrue in the case of a democracy, but if we take it in its literal meaning, which is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we really have to examine what that means and what our role in a democracy is. And we were not helped by the fact that we had very big personalities in South Africa's political life. We had Madiba, we had Albertina Sisulu. We were spoiled for choice, basically, in terms of the the the, the size and the pedigree of the people that we had as leaders. But that's not how life in a democracy generally is. Democracy is ugly. It is clumsy. It often involves a lot of contestation by ordinary people. And I think that because we thought this is a task for special people, in a way, we also stepped aside and thought we'll let the special people figure it out. Well, that has delivered load shedding to us. It has delivered state capture. It has delivered corruption and so on. And so the first thing I want to do is to ask you to inflate your own ego and say that you are good enough to determine South Africa's future. You really are good enough. If we don't believe that, our country is gone. We have to believe it. So that's the first thing I want to say today. And so I'm endorsing what Vuiswa said earlier, which is we are not here to present what our bright ideas are. We are here to say what our thoughts are and invite yours to say, but we think you need to have XYZ in there because it's important. We think you need to think about this differently and so on. Because if we don't do that, we end up with the same problem where a few people get to determine on their own the direction of the country. And I don't think we must allow that again. And so that's one of the things that animates all of us, that we are mere agents rather than people who are special in any way. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to say, and there'll just be five and quickly. The second thing I want to say is that we are streaming this event. I wish we would be able to stream all of them. And the reason we are is because there is also a culture of discussing things and getting to conclusions in absolute secrecy. There are times when meetings need to be closed, but we must learn to experience the fullness of South Africa's diversity in this conversation, with people participating on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and so on. And we differ and we work it out because South Africa is a diverse country. So none of you are members, as it were. So I don't know here who's a socialist or a Marxist or a rabid capitalist and so on. I don't know. But you are all here. And that's what we must get used to doing as South Africans. So it's important to us that this conversation can be accessed by a lot more people and that the video will live on YouTube for a very long time. And that's how we've tried to do things as much as possible. Of course, these kind of things cost money, so and money continues to be a challenge, but we try our best to do that. So that's the second thing. The last three things I'm going to talk about have got to do with the scale of the vision all of us should have. South Africa, I believe, does not suffer only or mostly from a lack of technical skills. South Africa has a political problem. The politics is broken. The politicians are generally bad. Generally. I'm not saying everyone, but the politicians are generally bad. A lot of people have no faith in politics at all. That is why they don't vote. They have no faith in politics. They don't believe it can change anything. If we really value the democracy, we must therefore think beyond the objective of just defeating the ANC and think bigger. And so I want to make just 3 propositions. The first is that it really is important that we advance the democracy and deepen it, and deepen democratic transparency and accountability. And people need to feel that they really are governing. That means we've got to change our laws and the way they work and what they enable public representatives and political parties to do and not to do. If we can't change that, people will say that doesn't put bread on the table and so on. I will tell you what has taken bread away from the table is a politics that is the exclusive domain of party political members. That's why we are here today in this trouble. So we need to get used to the idea of the South African people having access to more political information than they do now, more government information than they do now, and more say in what should happen to the country, and finally becoming the boss of the people that represent them. In isiXhosa, there's a term called umthunywa. Umthunywa is someone you send to do something for you. You don't get to call them my leader. You send them. They work for you. MPs and MPLs and councillors, in my language, in my culture, ngabathunywa. We have perverted this thing and made those people the ones who give instructions to the rest of us. And they walk when they walk into the room, we must stand up for them. So you can't change that culture by osmosis. You have to build the political institutions in such a way that the people are boss. And Mandla will talk to some of those things, like what we mean by political reforms. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to say is that there is a very powerful idea that came out of this country, I believe, at least in its expression, and that's the idea of non-racialism. And I'm not talking about going to watch the Springboks at Ellis Park or go and watch the Proteas and so on. Those are events. That's not non-racialism. We need to have an honest conversation about South Africa's history, about South Africa's present, and what we all do together to get it right. What we all do together to get it right. And that means we must be prepared to make sacrifices, all of us, that ensure that life is better for most South Africans, if not all South Africans. Let me make an example. I worked at Melrose Arch with a lady who lived in Orange Farm. She had to leave home at around 4:30 in the morning so that she could start cleaning at 7:15 at Melrose Arch. Then she left the office at 4:15 to go home. So that meant she never had an opportunity to be a parent to her kids. She never had an opportunity to be a member of a community and contribute to the affairs of her community. And she spent a significant portion of her income trying to get to and from work. That's what racism looks like. It's not someone calling you the K word. That's an insult. But racism is meaning that you don't have the opportunity to look after your kids because you must work in somebody's house and stay there. And then we shouted Minister Angie Motshekga for poor education outcomes and kids who are not able to read. I can help my kids with homework. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who don't have the opportunity to do so. We must want to change that. So if you talk about a new non-racialism, as we do, you're talking about material changes to people's lives in that way. So that's the second last point I want to make. And the last point I want to make is that someone said to me that if you guys can't convince your aunts and your uncles to support what you're doing, you must know you're doing something wrong. And they didn't mean in terms of age. They just meant like an ordinary person that you know, that you can relate to. And this is the point I'm making. So all of us have our different views. There's always a spectrum in life about anything. So there are people who believe in direct democracy. There is a young man who is in sort of our RISE ecosystem, very energetic. He's from Mangaung, very energetic, absolutely brilliant, very articulate, hardworking. He's got a wonderful community spirit. Absolutely nothing wrong with him. I love him. But he also believes in direct democracy. And so we sometimes, a couple of years ago, at least a year ago, we had this conversation about, well, you kind of like have to have institutions that get these things done. So like we can't always decide everything. You need the engineers and the ESCOM and this kind of thing. So you kind of like have to have a government. Because if you don't, then like we never get to agree on anything. So that's one example of like somebody believing in democracy to its like utmost. And what I'm saying, there's nothing wrong with that. But there are also people who say, no, we just need a Paul Kagame and a Putin in this country, right? To sort out everything. I always regard that as a cop out of the responsibilities of democracy, which is that you want somebody to do the work of politics so that you don't get involved in politics, and you can pay them to do it for you so that you don't have to be a citizen. You can act like a customer. That's not how democracy works. And so, what am I trying to say? These conversations that we are going to have a lot to do with finding the most effective ways of doing things rather than what our ideological sentiments are telling us to do. That said, we have also chosen the following, which is that we think that South Africa has a social democratic constitution. We think that South Africa's past and present demands a social democratic approach to how we build the future. And what does that mean? At its simplest level, at the risk of getting into trouble, we need public ownership, a sense of public ownership and actual public ownership of most things that people rely on. So taxis, my friends, are not public transport. They are private transport used by the public, the poor public in particular. Public transport is that train you get on, not the how train, that train you get on in somewhere in any other country where there's public transportation, and the municipal bus and so on, so that you can get to work and come back, and it's safe and it's affordable and so on. You need good public schools, not as some people who claim to be social democrats, and I've got 1.5 minutes, who claim to be social democrats who say, give every parent a voucher so that they can choose where to take their children. You see, that's a smart way of saying defund public education, by the way. That's what it means. That's what it means. So I then get to pay a private supplier to educate my kids. So we believe you need good public amenities that are owned by the public, the railways, the roads, the water, and so on, that is accessible to everybody, so that you don't have the kind of problems that you had some years ago in the US, where companies were switching electricity off to manipulate the electricity prices. Now, that's not to say you don't want public-private enterprise. You do, but you are saying in order to deliver a dignified life to most people, they need to have access to the most important basic amenities that enable them to live a good life without having to pay extra for it when they already have paid tax. And no, taxpayers are everyone. Anyone who buys at the shop is a taxpayer because of VAT. So what I'm trying to say is that we have tried to have a dream of a South Africa that we all want to live in, and we want to involve you in that dream. And so I am going to shut up and hand over to Mandla to get into some of the specifics. Then we have a conversation. If there is anything from your reading and from what Mandla says or any of us have not said, you need to stand up and not ask a question. Instead, to say, you guys have forgotten these two things. You need to put it in there and let's discuss it. Thank you.
Good evening, friends. It's good to be in a room with all of you. Thank you for braving the chilly weather to come and discuss politics and policy with us. Okay, so I think I have a presentation somewhere that should be perfect. Let me get the clicker from our table over there. All good, all good. All right, so I think thank you for setting the scene, Wiswa and Songezo. Great to get into this as a policy nerd. This is one of my favorite things to do. So, today I want to really talk a little bit about this discussion document, as well as some of our early policy priorities that we've decided to frame before we get into a broad discussion. Like songs, I'm going to just turn on a stopwatch here so I can make sure I don't talk forever. In a previous life, I worked in government, in national government, and would do these public consultations. And it was an amazing thing. You would have any officials, there would be a guy would take 10, 15 minutes to introduce. Even the vote of thanks could be 20 minutes. In a 2 or 3 hour program, there'd be like 20 minutes for the actual public to engage. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to get right into it and I'll just kind of skip along. I think Songs has talked about set up the process, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. I think I'll talk a little bit about what we ultimately want to emerge with, right? We want to emerge with a People's Manifesto and an overall policy framework that's going to set us up to govern. We're not doing this thing to sit on the sidelines while others continue to run the country into the ground. We want to emerge with this, with a governing agenda that is going to help us build the South Africa we deserve. That agenda should be able to spell out what do we need to do in the very short term to arrest the crisis that we're in, to stop the bleeding. Secondly, to set us up and for success and to reset, right? So how do we get on a path towards progress where we can achieve tangible results that citizens can see and feel in sort of the first year or so? And then finally, over the course of 5 years, what kind of meaningful progress can you create? Now, why did we come up with this discussion document? So as you'll see on one of the subsequent slides, I'm going to talk about some of the big questions, actually the next slide, about some of the big questions which politics is really about. And I think it was important for us to start a little bit with a macro and with an overall worldview of how we think about politics, because, if two people, for example, to use Sogezo's terminology, if a rabid capitalist and a socialist sit down to discuss how should the national budget in February be organized, they're not going to agree on much. If they're to sit down and discuss, what should our policy on SOEs be, state-owned enterprises, they're not going to agree on much. So let's start a little bit by having more of a broad conversation about the big questions, give a little sense of our worldview and where we think South Africans sit or should sit on some of the biggest questions facing society, and then drill into the micro. So essentially was the process. So these are some of the big questions, right? These are some of the core questions about politics. So putting these isms aside, right? Socialism, capitalism, and so on. Capitalism is a pejorative, by the way. So-called capitalists did not actually start out saying they're capitalists, but so it's actually a pejorative by socialists. So the moment you identify yourself as a capitalist, you're already losing. But the question of how do we create wealth, right? So let's actually put the isms aside. In my view, you should not let someone run your country if you don't understand their theory of how to create wealth, because it doesn't come from anywhere, right? As we've seen, every February, the finance minister reads us our bank balance, and then we are shocked at the fact that it's not where we want it to be, and at how much is on our national credit card. So some of my friends who are more socially minded, who I love, I always say, let's look at where the money comes from, right? Because I agree with everything that you want to have. For instance, that question lower down of how much government we can afford, I agree on all of those things that you want. But I think they need to be paid for. So we need to have a theory about how we create wealth. Who gets what? That is essentially the field of political economy, right? A very fraught question. It's influenced by race, it's influenced by gender, it's influenced by geography. In fact, a huge amount of our political contestation in South Africa is around that question. I won't go through all of these, but I think you can see how central many of these are. Balancing economic development and environmental sustainability. It's a core question every society needs to answer. We're talking about the just energy transition right now. Interestingly, the West was saying, to stop funding coal, South Africa, no more coal, you guys need to do wind and solar. And then Russia invaded Ukraine, and all of a sudden Germany was firing up coal and gas plants. The same people that told us we are not allowed to use our gas resources. Now, there's a gentleman in the room, Mitchell, a young man who is very environmentally minded, is going to keep us honest about why first of all, I agree we're in a climate crisis, and environment is about more than just the climate. It's about air, it's about water, it's about our water, it's about all sorts of things, biodiversity. And so we have to balance this, right? At the same time, people need to eat, they need to warm their homes, they need fuel to cook their food, they need to be able to fulfill their basic needs in the moment. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we have a living habitat for not only ourselves, but our children, grandchildren, and so on. So these are some of the core questions that, our role as the policy team is not going to be to impose our views on Rise Mzansi and South Africa as a whole, but hopefully to ask intelligent questions, spark discourse and debate, and make sure that we as a collective come up with compelling answers that a plurality of South Africans that will resonate with the majority of the country. Bold, pragmatic, and evidence-based. I just want to say, in South Africa, I think we really lack a quality of debate, right? And I think we need to, a culture of debate. And I think we need to really role model and create that culture within Rise Mzansi, right? We need to ask tough questions of each other, interrogate each other's views, seek to persuade each other through logic and reason, and also be persuadable, right? So let's also not come in only with our deeply held views and not be open to seeing things from others' perspectives, and also through being introduced to evidence that may show us something we thought deep conventional wisdom that we may have held might not have been the best. So let's be willing to persuade, but also be persuadable. So number one, what are we here for? So this is what we call our North Star, which just means, in other words, wherever you are on Earth and you're trying to navigate yourself, the one thing you can do is understand where does the sun rise, where does it set, but more importantly, know where the North Star is, right? So it's just a metaphor about what is the thing that ultimately you are striving, moving towards, that guides what you do. I'm not in this to be right. I'm not in this for acclaim. We're not in this for anything other than to create the South Africa we deserve. And in our view, that South Africa is one which is equal, safe, prosperous, and united. And in our view, it must be achievable in a single generation. It's unfortunately not a 2 or 3 year project. It's not a 5-year project. I'm not going to lie to you. If you look at the most successful late developing countries, the countries that have developed in the 20th century rapidly, it took a generation or two. Look at the South Koreas, the Chinas, the Taiwan. Well, China is an odd case, as much as it's still a lower middle income country, but let's not get into those development weeds. But South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, countries that went from poor to rich in a single generation. That's generally what it's taken. That doesn't mean, of course, that we're saying you can only look forward to progress over 25 years. All right, so what does that mean? So in our view, any government, A Rise Mzansi government or any other government needs to be measurable in terms of its effectiveness. Because politics, it's fine. People have all sorts of different reasons for why they're involved in politics. They have all sorts of different reasons for making political choices, and that's fine. Some people, it may be identity or cultural affinity. It may be, they may just be in it about policy. They may have one issue that they care about and they don't care about anything else. Everyone's point is justified, but it becomes important to understand, how do you measure the effectiveness of a government? I remember in the mid-2000s when I'd have debates with some of my ANC friends, and it was like this weddedness to this party. And I'd ask at some point, under what circumstances would you break from this party? Because you can't tell me that you love this party so much that no matter what happens to the country, you can't imagine a point at which you decide you'll take your vote elsewhere. So quite frankly, if a Rise Mzansi government does not make society more prosperous, does not reduce unemployment, poverty, and inequality over time steadily, does not reduce the rate of violent crime, does not make South Africans live longer, then you should take your vote elsewhere. You should not be wedded to some party. You are not a citizen of Rise Mzansi or a citizen of the African National Congress. You're a citizen of South Africa. South Africans on average live to something like 66 years old. That's the average life expectancy of South African born today. If you were born in large part, the global average is something like 77, 78. Rich world, 80 plus. Japan, close to 90. Think about the people that you love most in this world. Think you want them to live a long life, right? People go to political conferences and shout, "Viva, so-and-so, viva." Viva means long live, ultimately. Above all else, I want to live to the ripe old age. Above all else. I hope to make $1 million in my lifetime, but more importantly, I would love to live a long and healthy life. So these are the things we should start critically judging a government on, a political movement on, and importantly, and that's any government, right? Again, I think it's very important that very often in South Africa, we think of things in isolation. So we think of, we have this facile debate over, is South Africa better today than in 1994, which is completely the wrong question. I mean, it is better today than 1994, it should be. But that's the wrong question. I mean, and there are people who say, so what? Even if I'm poorer today than I was in 1994, I'm free. So, I mean, it's a ridiculous debate. The question is not, is South Africa a better country than 1994? The question is, how close are we to the country we deserve? That's the question we need to be asking. Are we close? Are we far away? Are we getting closer? Do we feel like the country is heading in the right direction? And I think we also need to, again, it's just about learning from other countries as well. We're one of 200 countries on the planet. We're 60 million people in a world of 8 billion people. It can be important from time to time to look around and see what has worked for other countries, what hasn't worked for other countries, right? In terms of international development, when you look at development economics, you ask the question, okay, when you try to say, when development economists look at what kind of policies have helped countries develop rapidly, and then, okay, you look at the countries, which of the countries have been most successful? The first thing you do is you remove the countries that have a whole lot of oil and a small population, because that's like you won the development lottery. If you're Norway, you got like 7 million people, and you have a sea of oil, like we can't really look at what policies you implemented because we don't have that. I'll just ask, shout out if you know the country that has the world's largest oil reserves. Just throw out a country name. Okay, I've heard Bolivia, I think Venezuela, Iraq, Russia, Colombia, Nigeria, a lot of countries. The answer is Venezuela. You may then be surprised, why are people fleeing Venezuela? Why do I hear about bare supermarket shelves and so on? Because they've massively mismanaged their oil wealth. I don't have to get into the weeds on it. There are parties in South Africa that want to emulate Venezuela's policies. I think that's a bad idea. But let's move right along. Look, I think ultimately, I'm a big believer that I just had this epiphany recently. It's absolutely clear to me that the people running our country right now have they don't wake up and go to work every day thinking about transforming the country to build the South Africa we deserve. I can tell you that right now. I hate to break it to you, and I don't want to spend time on the party that is soon going to be removed from power, but because I think about, but why? Greta Mantashe, the Minister of Energy, you've added 0 megawatts to the grid in 5 years. What are you actually doing on a daily basis? And the answer is, in my view, it's that these people are not interested in transforming South Africa. They're interested in managing dysfunction. I don't really care how good or bad things are. As long as I'm in charge, I'm happy. I'm the guy that everything moves through. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to transform this country. And we want South Africa, South Africans, I believe, I no longer do. You can tell me if you do. I no longer turn on the news, open the newspaper, expecting to see South Africa succeeds in fixing problem X. I no longer have that expectation. It's like, how bad is it today? What do I need to worry about more than the other thing today? Is it okay? It's not even electricity, it's water. Okay. All right. Is it crime? Is there going to be a riot? Like, I don't open thinking, expecting good news. We're in this business to try to create good news. Let's talk a little bit about some of our reform priorities. I'm going to blast through some of these. The electoral system, I think, very clear. I think there's no scenario in which our People's Manifesto is not going to include proposals to reform our electoral system, to make it more accountable, more representative. You should know who your representatives are. Right now, I live, breathe, eat, sleep politics. I have no idea which of the 400 MPs I can call and say, do something about this issue, right? Nominally, Parliament allocates a constituency of some kind. That element is clearly missing in our system, and that's something we clearly need to bring to the table. Ooh, I don't know what's happening with my nifty animations here, but Parliament, the legislature, very clearly, we've seen the failures of Parliament not holding government to account. All of you have watched the Zondo Commission over the last 3 or 4 years. I don't need to tell you more about that. But there are other things as well. Like, for instance, the fact that Parliament's actually supposed to introduce legislation. And we're going to get into why legislation is important. Whatever your priorities are, many of the things that we need require legislative changes, whether it's a social policy issue, economic policy issue. And Parliament is supposed to pass laws. It rarely does. In fact, mainly it relies on government departments to pass laws. And it's not to say government departments and ministers should not introduce legislation, but Parliament, they're actually lawmakers. And that's another thing where you should look around at some of the people in our Parliament that are falling asleep on benches, that are hurling insults at people. They're actually supposed to be writing laws that are going to solve public problems. So we need more capacity within Parliament to do that. In our executive, we need system leaders. I talked about this, about not people who are content to manage dysfunction, but people who not only are interested in, but are capable of driving transformational change. Number one is people that role model ethics and competence, right? As a starting point, how do you expect a police officer that earns a modest salary not to ask for bribes if every police minister and police commissioner is accused of impropriety of some kind, right? So at a certain point, these ministers, starting point is you need to role model the kind of public service that you want of our 1.2 million public servants. Secondly, leaders in the executive need to be able to set an agenda, right? There's a power in the bully pulpit, right? Ministers, when they walk into a room, people stand up, not because whatever about who they are as people, but because we respect the office and we respect that this person is South Africa's leading figure for facilitating progress on a particular issue. They need to set a vision for change that creates broad alignment in society and stops us from all pulling in our different directions and focus only on our narrow interests. They need to then be able to facilitate change. They need to actually be competent enough to figure out an agenda of how do you move a system? To create change in education is the work of decades, right? To help stimulate the growth of industries and change the structure of our economy requires you to get many different stakeholders moving. So these are just some of the things that we need coming out of the executive. The judiciary is very important. Access to justice, how fast justice takes. There are literally people in this, the median age in South Africa is 27 years old, 27 or 28. It means half of the country is older, half the country is younger than that age. There are people in this country, there's probably about maybe a third of this country, anyone in this country who is what is it, maybe 16 or older, as long as they've been alive, Jacob Zuma has been on trial for these corruption charges. They haven't been resolved one way or the other. Is he guilty? Is he not guilty? And our judicial system is not able to tell us that. People talk about Steinhoff, any number of matters, not to mention the smaller matters that ordinary people have to deal with on a daily basis. We need to do something about just the speed and metabolism of our justice system, as well as just questions of access. Public safety. In my view, the core responsibilities of government are twofold. I mean, there's a number of I'm a political scientist. The core responsibility of the state is, number one, to protect national borders and to have a monopoly on violence within them. What does that mean? It ultimately refers to this idea that we cede a bit of our freedom to the state in exchange for, first and foremost, primarily our safety, right? At the core of it. A state is supposed to keep its citizens safe. Secondly, I think the ability for us to fulfill our basic needs. In South Africa, about 20 to 25,000 people die of murder every year. Murders are represented by a statistic called intentional homicides per 100,000 people. The number is something like 35, 36. But it's 20 to 25,000 South Africans lose their life to murder every year. The number in Kenya is 5 per 100,000, per 100,000 people. So now, which is 14% of our number. So let's say 220 South Africans have died over the last 10 years to murder. Another human being decided to end their life. Let's say 220,000. If those people were Kenyan, 190,000 of them would be alive right now. Think about the people that matter most to you in this world, and imagine the idea of their life ending arbitrarily. And then think about the statistic that 84% of homicides in South Africa do not lead to an arrest. Now, so every time, basically, when you turn on the news, 7 killed in Umlazi, family gunned down in Maritzburg, 11-year-old girl killed in Westbury. Basically, no one's going to jail, in essence. Now, Songezo Songezo asks the question, is not just crime, it's also road safety, right? So we have some of the worst traffic incidents in the world. And so these are some of the issues. When we talk about rule of law and public safety, we're broadening it beyond the question of just crime. But we're saying we need to restore a culture of life in South Africa where life matters, where people's lives are that end unnaturally. We don't shrug and go on with our daily business. This is ultimately the core thing that government needs to start with, which is why it is one of our top priorities. And we understand what that entails. Having competent police leadership, number one, that's ethical, where the people that lead the police service, it's not questionable as to their character and their fitness for office. That the police service is not politicized, and its capacity or incapacity is there about its ability to not prosecute politicians, and therefore other criminals also go free. Where mafias and gangs do not operate unbothered by the law, by the police service. Again, political science, the state is supposed to have a monopoly on violence. Quite frankly, the state does not extend across the borders of this country. Because whoever has a monopoly on violence is the government. When you leave your house, the people that can arbitrarily affect your freedom and harm you is essentially the government. And so if you live in the Cape Flats, if you live in Umlazi, if you live in large parts of our country, it's actually questionable whether you have a government, quite frankly. Our sister organization, Ravonia Circle, we're doing some research around the country, and Lukhona was telling me that in Khayelitsha, he heard about people who they have to pay gangsters not to take their weaves. There are women that have to do this. So at the point that you have to pay a thug not to rob you, do you have a government? I think our view as Rise and Mzansi is we need to take a holistic approach to issues, as Songezo very often talks about. When we talk about crime, alcohol and drugs, drugs have been a huge theme when we go around the country, around the nexus with crime. Alcohol. Most violent crimes, a vast majority of violent crimes have some nexus with alcohol. Infrastructure, again, do you have safe places to live and work, to walk? Are there street lights that are working? Do people have opportunities? People who have jobs, who have a living, who are invested in society, it's not to say those people don't commit crimes, but they tend to commit violent crime a lot less than people who have no stake in society. Economic development. We're going to do a session on this. I won't go too deep into it, but I do want to set some things on the table. Why do economics matter? Why does economic growth matter? Number one, it's the size of the pie, right? So if we talk about, again, ability to fulfill our basic needs, I'm a big believer that if you're free, you're safe, and you have a job or a business or some other way to afford your livelihood, 80% of your issues are addressed. Not to say I don't care about your education, your healthcare, all sorts of other things. But if you're free, you're safe, and you have a livelihood, we're getting somewhere. And we know that that's not the truth for most South Africans. So I want to just show you a page about, not just except for, again, GDP is an imperfect measure. It doesn't include, well-being. It doesn't include environment, the cost of the environment. It's an imperfect measure. But let's just say for the sake of conversation that GDP is linked to living standards. And again, it's the size of the pie. If it's a very unequal pie as it is in South Africa, then of course, even a growing pie may not benefit everyone, which is why economic justice, as we'll get to, is important. But for the sake of conversation, let's just say rising GDP means creates the possibility of rising living standards. It is a necessary but not sufficient condition. So in other words, if I say to you GDP is growing, it does not mean everyone is benefiting. But if I tell you GDP is not growing, it definitely means everyone is not benefiting, if that's clear. So I would rather be talking about how to solve poverty, unemployment, racism with a growing pie than a pie that is stagnant. So ultimately, when we talk about late developing countries that have been successful, why did in the NDP that Cyril Ramaphosa was chair of and now forgets because he does not want to be measured by this target? You'll not hear him talk about this target ever. Why did that exercise come up with this number of 5.4% growth? It came up with this number because the most successful late developing countries in the second half of the 20th century, mainly in East and Southeast Asia, were able to sustain economic growth of 5% plus over time, which allowed them to double their economy every 12 or 13 years. As you can see, at current growth rates, first of all, the South African population growth on average over the past decade has been about 1.6. So in other words, we have to grow at 1.6% just to stand still. Anything less than 1.6%, we're sliding backwards. Anything greater, we're moving ahead. And this shows you that over the last decade, from 2013 to 2022, at the rate at which we grew, it will take us 70 years to double the size of our economy and therefore living standards. Now, let's get into what are some of the things I'd like you to consider. So we need to create a modern, inclusive, and competitive industrial and knowledge economy. Modern, that economy is geared for the industries and challenges of today, not the industries and challenges of 50 years ago. Inclusive, everybody benefits, not just a small share of the population. All races, all genders, people living in all geographies, not just those living in the urban centers. Export-led growth, that's how the most successful late developing countries have grown. And we'll talk more about that in the economic roundtable. I'm going to come back to this question about the basics. Economic justice, I'm also going to come back to this on the next slide. All right, when we talk about government working, and we start to talk about the bones of what our proposals will look like, this is basic economic management. This is just, if you're a government, you need to be able to do this. If you can't do this, you shouldn't be running a government. Songezo hosted a great conversation with Wandile Sihlobo on Sunday. He's a leading agricultural economist in South Africa. He's talking about the agricultural sector and the economy broadly, but very basic things. How do farmers across the country, including especially Black farmers, what are some of the things they need? Songezo asked this question: if you were Minister of Agriculture, what would you do? The first thing he said, they need roads. You have orders for your produce, you need to get it somewhere. You need roads. Talk about rail. Again, so let's say you are a more socialist, social leaning friend, UBI, right? You want UBI. I want UBI. Right now, in our budget is something like 1.6 trillion rand in the national budget. That's how much we spend. We raise in taxes maybe 1.1 or 1.2 million. The other 400 billion we get from borrowing. Guess who we borrow from? Capitalists. So in other words, to fund these social programs, you sit across from someone who's an asset manager at BlackRock and you say, we as the National Treasury would like to sell you a bond, $500 million. They do this every week. They need to raise up 4 or 5 billion rands a week. And we say, please buy our bond, give us $500 million, and over the course of 10 years, we'll give you X% per year. So if you want a social program like UBI, you can do one of three things. You can cut something from the budget. And let's say UBI costs about 150 billion a year. I think so. Those are some of the estimates I've seen. You can cut something. There are a handful of things you can do. And this is indisputable. It's not opinion. It's fact. You can cut something from the budget. When Zuma woke up one December and decided we needed free education, I was working in National Treasury. Things were cut from the budget, including school infrastructure, water infrastructure spending. You can cut something from the budget. You can borrow from a capitalist. You can ask the school teachers in Canada whose pension BlackRock is managing, or the school teachers in South Africa whose pension Sanlam or Old Mutual or GPF is managing, and you can ask them to borrow their money. You can print money. You can print money. You may find that the value of the rand decreases. The food basket that ordinary South Africans buy costs more money because there's more rands floating around, so they become less valuable. I disagree with some of my friends on the left. We're not America. We can't print money with no consequences, as modern monetary theory says. Or you can grow the economy. How do you grow the economy? We have more demand for all the minerals we're able to export, for even some of the agriculture we're able to export, then we can get to our railways and our ports. So for those that are obsessed with the state running and owning everything, there are citrus farmers in South Africa who can't get their citrus to port, or their citrus rots at the port because of delays at Transnet, delays on the railway line, delays on the port. So their citrus is rotting. So there are ordinary South Africans that are suffering because the state wants to do things it can't do. My professor, Ricardo Hausman, would say, be a smart landowner. Don't be a bad manager of a port terminal. By the way, the state should own this, should own that, friends. Guys, the state has a golden share in every business in South Africa. It's called tax. And the nice thing about tax is, when the company needs money to invest, you are not involved. So if you're a mining company and you need to raise hundreds of millions of rand to go around and dig holes and see if there's minerals, if I'm not a shareholder, I'm not involved in that part. As far as I just say, oh, you made money, great, can I have 30%? Actually, with royalties, it's even more. But when you want to be a shareholder, like in Eskom, in Transnet, in SAA, in Denel, guess what? You don't just take dividends. From time to time, you need to put up money. By the way, we need new power stations. Okay, which of you want more police on the streets? You want more schools? You don't want classrooms to have 50 or 60 people in the classroom. You want them to have 30 people. Okay, great. You want to build schools? No. We need to build a solar power station. You said you want the state to build everything. You don't want capitalists to build the power and buy it from you. The other risk of building everything is that when you squander the money by giving it to your Gupta pals, it's our money that is wasted. If Calvin Co. Solar builds a power station, I've said to Calvin, I'll buy your power for 2 rand a kilowatt, chief. That's it. The 100 million rands you have to raise to build that solar plant doesn't involve me. Once you build it, hey, you chose the wrong contractor. You decided to buy your boilers from the Tuli house. Your 100 million now costs 200 million. Hey, chief, can I get it bigger? Calvin, that wasn't our agreement. You told me 2 rand per kilowatt, right? I agreed with you. I spoke to my banker. I spoke to the DG of Treasury. The 2 rand per kilowatt is available. When you can generate that power for 2 rand per kilowatt, I'm here for you. I didn't ask you to buy your boilers from the Tuli house. The next man says he'll sell me wind power for 2 rand per kilowatt. 2 rand per kilowatt. When you are ready to sell it to me, I'm here. But until then, I'll go to the next man. So roads, rail, generally internationally, goods over about 400 kilometers should move by rail. It's more competitive than by road. In South Africa, that doesn't happen. What does that mean? So you are growing citrus in the Western Cape. You're a black farmer, you've done the work, you went to the land bank, they gave you money, you borrowed money from your friend Tebza, you sold a few investors in this room, you've got your citrus farm going. Now, you're competing with citrus farmers in Brazil, citrus farmers in Central America, Vietnam, all sorts of places, Morocco. Those countries have functioning rail and port systems. Transnet's inefficiency is now a tax on you. You are selling to Waitrose in UAE. Waitrose is just interested in, I just need good-looking oranges that are X per kg. Others can provide, you can't provide because of Transnet's dysfunction. So these are the basics. Rules of the game, I won't go through too much into that. Speed limit. Speed limit is very important. We have a government that wants to pat itself on the back for getting the right decision 10 years later. We were supposed to, broadband was supposed to move to spectrum, was supposed to happen in 2012, happened last year. They want to be patted on the back. They're finally accepting that maybe we should let in private players buy power. We saw that the president had to overrule his own energy minister to allow businesses, mines and so on that are desperate for power to generate their own power. So it's not just to get to the right decisions, not get there 5 to 10 years late. That means something to the businesses, to the households that were dependent on you making the right decision. And it is why our economy has not grown over the past decade, because we are stuck. Next level, so that's the basic level. Advanced economic management. So if you get the first things right, you can get to like 3% growth, right? We'd be at 3% if it wasn't for Eskom and Transnet. If we had reliable electricity and we had railways and ports that worked, we'd probably be at 3% with no other changes. So, mind you, every year, President, I'm not going to WEF, going home to deal with these crises. At WEF, serious countries are not talking about the stuff at the top. So when countries are talking to big companies to say, Tesla, build your next gigafactory in my country, they're not saying, we hope to guarantee you electricity 2 years from now. They're not having those conversations. They're saying, listen, we've got this many engineers, we've got a large workforce, we have skilled people, we've got special economic zones. They're talking about the stuff at the bottom. Smart, agile sector policy. Let's use the agriculture example. Industrial. So, okay, we say, look, South Africa is a competitive country when it comes to citrus. We've proven we can do this. There are high value commodities like strawberries, blueberries, these things are very good. Okay, let's grow this thing, right? Now, some of the things that you need to do, in addition to the stuff at the top, roads, railways, you need to then be able to improve skills and technology. So we're a water scarce country. The leading countries in the world, farming countries in the world, are using now precision technology. So they don't just spraying water and 80% of it is wasted. They've got tunnels to control temperature. You need less fertilizer, less pests. Plus your customers are saying, We need organic. So you have to be showing you're doing environmentally. And besides the companies, Mitchell is telling you we can't just be pumping fertilizer into the ground and toxins into the ground, which is correct. We can't just be washing all our fruits and vegetables and all of these chemicals. So you need tunnels. So now you have less insects getting to your stuff. So you need less pesticides. And you use drip irrigation. So you have a little spout on the top of each little plant that gives it just enough water. And you have little sensors that tell you this one, the nutrient levels are fine. This one needs more water. This needs more this and that. It cuts down on all of your costs. So that's the next level of farming. So then we need to be able to have institutes around the country that are helping farmers develop those techniques. We need to then be having government extension services around the country that are helping the farmers try these seeds and these varietals. They've been proven to work in our climate, and so on. And also having patient, cheap finance for these farmers so that they can actually afford these technologies. So that's how you get to the next level. And obviously it's clear which level we are currently at. So these are some of the things that help us get there. In the interest of time, let me just blast through this. This is just some thought starters, right? So if you're talking about, again, my view is political economy, who gets what, right? Too much of our conversation has been about, I think over time in this country has been about at the end, right, of transformation. So how do we, when you're deciding the contract, how do you make sure it goes to a black player versus a white? Some of that stuff is important, and I talk about public procurement there, but another part of it is how do you grow black entrepreneurs, industrialists? How do you help them thrive and succeed at exporting in particular, because that's how you create wealth, right? And so these are just some of the things. You need to assist with access to markets, domestic and international. Some of our markets are highly concentrated. International, clearly we need to have a conversation about foreign policy. Access to foreign markets is not the only leg of economic policy. In my view, our current government's uncritical support of Russia is wrong, because this country, how it operates on the international stage, in my view, is not aligned with our values as a country. So it's not just about, but in addition to that, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of South Africans are employed in industries that are either, okay, let me wrap up, that are either, in other words, I think that point is clear. Let me just get to, I talked about access to technology with the drip irrigation example, access to capital. We have, our economy is about a 6 trillion rand economy. That's 6,000 billion. I checked recently, and I think the IDC lends about 5 billion rand a year. 5 or 6 billion, which is, I don't know, maybe 0.001%. That's not development finance. That's not how you grow an economy and how you increase fixed investment. We'll come back to that in the later sessions. I'm going to blast through some of this stuff around fighting corruption. In my view, I'll just say this. South Africa has very stringent rules on public procurement and corruption, the Public Financial Management Act. I'm not going to say one way or the other. I don't know that we need new rules. I do think we need stronger institutions. But what I will say to you is that I believe no set of rules in the world is going to protect the hens if a fox is guarding the hen house. So as a starting point, I think we need to focus on who do we put in charge of our funds, first and foremost, and then institutions and then rules, as opposed to thinking the most sophisticated rules in the world will stop foxes from killing poor hens. Climate change and energy, look, I think we need a balanced agenda. This is obviously going to need more time to get through. We very clearly need to, the energy sector is being disrupted. I think we need to explore how do we balance providing energy for development with the resources that we have. Energy security is also important, so we don't have wild swings in our petrol price and our price of electricity every time there's a shock, as well as environmental sustainability. So I think we need to come up with a energy and climate policy that allows us to balance all of those things. Before I close, let me maybe say, let me close with one last thing. I think there's one important section in the Well, in the discussion document, Resetting and Rebuilding South Africa, about, I'll just tell you what it's called, Investing in People, Capability, and Well-Being. So we are very adamant that, you know, we talk about us as a South Africa in which everyone has the chance to thrive. And when we talk about social democracy, what we mean is, one of the core distinctions is that we accept the own, I don't want to say the onus, but we think the state should accept the responsibility, as really our constitution, that's really the ethos of our constitution, to make sure that everyone has the chance to thrive, that it's not just every man or woman for him or herself. And I'll just speak a little bit about the things that go into that as I close. The first is food security and nutrition, right? So eradication of hunger and malnutrition. Something like 8% of children in South Africa are stunted. Their brains do not fully develop because they are hungry. There's no scenario in which any one child in this country should go to sleep hungry, much less not be able to physically develop because they do not have access to food. Early childhood development, which every child should have access to. Protection from harm, a sense of security, caregiving, quality basic education. Very clearly, we need to have an education system which ensures that every learner emerges on the other side, having been equipped with the tools to be a full and productive member of society and to earn and to generate a livelihood, which is going to require next generation skills. They need to be learning problem solving and teamwork and collaboration and appropriate technology, as opposed to in a world of AI, we can be having people in school doing rote learning. My education is obsolete, and we need to make sure that the children going into school today are not learning an obsolete education. Higher education, training, and adult learning, very clearly, for adults to participate in these industries, and they need skills. When we get into the economic section, we're going to talk about how societies go through transformation, where most citizens are engaged in agriculture production, which transfers to manufacturing, which has peaked in South Africa 30 years ago, and now services, which requires higher levels of education and constantly updating and adapting education. Healthcare, which we need to talk about, income transfers and social insurance. And again, these things are important. We need to have the discussion about what's needed, as well as how to fund them in order to be responsible, be a responsible movement. And finally, building capacity for generating intergenerational wealth, which includes financial literacy, assistance to acquire and keep assets. Let me stop there. I've already taken up too much time. Thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mandla. The business of building a new country is a tough one that requires stamina and discipline. And so I'm happy that we are going to fight this through. Some of the sessions that will come in the future will be 6-hour sessions. So this is good practice. We've got to be future fit for policy work. We are, after all, in the contestation of ideas. So I think maybe if you guys can just stand up quickly, everybody, up on your feet, please. Up on your feet, everybody up on your feet, let's extend our hands up to the sky, both of them. Let's go. To the side, touch the sides all the way to Cape Town, between Cape to Cairo. Yeah, all the way down. Lean down. Swivel. Any comrades runners here? All right, let's take a seat, guys. Let's take a seat. We can take a seat. Thank you so much. Let's keep the energy up. I know we are a bit tired, but let's keep it going. So we're going to take some questions and comments. I think this is not about sending questions to the panel. This is a discussion. We in this room all are owning the process of shaping the policy direction. But if you want clarity, there's an opportunity to do that. So what I'll do is let me take rounds of 3, whether it's a question or comment, and then we will deal with that. and then we'll keep it moving in that fashion. Hopefully we converge towards a particular outcome if you guys are comfortable with that. If I may ask, there probably are a lot of questions, so try to narrow the context, because I know sometimes questions require context. If you are going to give us context, please keep it as minimal as possible, and then shoot with your one question, and then we'll take it from there. Is there a roving mic that's available? Okay, we've got a roving mic. And then I think the panel will answer from the table, if you don't mind. I just want to make sure from a tech point of view, are you able to see the table? Okay, fantastic. First question. Or comment, yeah. How do you feel about what we've just shared? I'll note the first hand there. Second hand up. Second question to the right, and then third question. There we go. Okay, we've got our 3 questions. Let's go for it.
Hi, everyone. It's Mayesh Pillay. It's really impressive, what we've seen so far. I think our country needs that. Just a comment on the vision. I think we need to up our game. Democracy throughout the world is broken. And, so it shouldn't just be a South African focus. I think it's a chance for South Africa to give the world a better democracy. And a tagline to that would be, what kind of political system would you want to take to Mars? So something like that can really, and that's a comment there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Noted. Next question, comment?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was a good presentation. Thanks. And my input would be that I would want to see RISE be able to distinguish itself just from the very beginning.
Mm.
You would know what happened to COPE, simply because it could not say this is where and how we're different from the ANC. I think that is very important. Secondly, I have a problem with the overuse of the word politics, personally, because I think people are tired of politics, and they are looking for something new and different. You would correct me. I see there are a lot of intelligent people here. Somebody said you can't solve problems with the same mindset that created them. So we are where we are because of politics, especially party politics. And so the approach and the mindset, I feel that it has to be different. How, I'm not sure at this stage. And I think we have to be very purposeful. We have to be deliberate about the institutions that we need to change or remove, for that matter. South Africa is highly politicized. And I think it's very important that RISE brings or becomes a breath of fresh air, very politicized. And I think it's important because it's politicized, there are institutions that were established for political purposes. You see, unemployment rate among politicians is 0.9. Whatever we have done has been to support politics. For an example, there's no need why we have districts in the municipality. It's just a structure that is taking a lot of resources that are supposed to be going to the local municipalities and provinces. Just a huge bureaucratic structure where you graduate from being a councillor and then you become an MEC, then you get a blue light and so on, And I think we need to redefine and probably reduce provinces so that we have a proper government that is able to support local municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, just please say your name so that when we do respond, we can direct the response to you.
Okay. Vincent Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent Jones.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Mitchell Black. So I have no fundamental disagreements with anything that has been presented tonight. But to agree a little bit with what the previous speakers just said, we're alive at a point in history where, for the first time, people are getting to ask very fundamental questions. If we take the thoughts of some great African thinkers who've come before us, such as Kwasi Wiredu, we are faced with an opportunity for profound decolonization in our time, and specifically a decolonization of concepts. We have historically been told what government is, or imported models of what a government is. We have imported ideas of what politics are. We have imported ideas of what infrastructure is. And even the way that the beginning of your presentation, Mandla, framed the first question of politics is, how do we create wealth? I think Rise is doing fantastic work to give content to the word we in that sentence, but there isn't enough conceptual work being done to ask what is wealth. We are working on an imported idea of what it means to be a wealthy society, to be a wealthy people, to be a wealthy individual. So the kind of provocation that I have here, or the comment, is we are using a lot of terms that we have imported the meanings of, without, in this beautiful emancipatory moment where we are creating new thought based in the ideas of African thinkers for the first time in history. Not to say that never existed before, but now we have the institutions and the ability to do it proudly and to assert agency and the ability to think and know in this continent. It's very important that we do the assumed work and not presuppose what, in that first question, something as important as wealth means. Where etymologically the word wealth has next to nothing to do with material wealth or money. The word wealth is actually derived from the words well-being. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mitchell. I will hand over to Mandla for a response, and then Song as well, and Madam Chair as well.
Thank you. I think I've said more than enough. I'm more listening to, I think many of these inputs don't require a response. I'm agreeing, reflecting. So I don't think I need to take up more time by responding to each and every point. So I will just say, those are not an exhaustive list of the core questions of politics, and they are not in order of importance. I think, how is power exercised, organized, and shared is, for me, maybe the core question of politics. But I don't want to, but I do just want to make that point so people don't think that's all we care about.
No, I just wanted to appreciate your comment, Mitchell, because I think an important part of this exercise is not simply to look with our current lens and look at what we see today. I think we have a tendency of being framed in our current crisis and our current frame of reference. And I very much welcome and appreciate the challenge to us all to reimagine, completely reimagine. Let's redefine, let's think outside of conventions. Let's go there. And I think that's a wonderful challenge to us all. Thanks.
Now, I wanted to say, all of you have just given yourselves a task as part of the People's Manifesto process. So thank you very much.
I would try something here. Yes, Madla.
Let me just add one thing. So we talked about there are going to be a number of ways in which people can contribute. We have the manifesto town halls and physical interactions like these. We have our WhatsApp groups, which is just a way that we're organizing our work, and we have policy working groups in those WhatsApp groups on different facets of policy. You can send us a suggestion, a one-line paragraph, a 3-page policy brief to policy@risemzansi.org, which I'm sure Mabina will blast across the different communication platforms, and of course, social media. So I just wanted to make sure that we shared those different avenues.
Thanks, Mandla. Whilst I know that we want to take away the questions, I also want to use this moment to kind of go a little bit deeper, and also not to focus the idea that the panel are responsible for the work that needs to be done. So I'm going to do an exercise of putting it back into the room, because I think the whole process is to try to access the wisdom of everyone. So Mandla may be listening, we are listening, Songezo is listening. Is there anybody in the room who would make an attempt at wanting to answer some of the questions that have been tabled? Questions around differentiation. This has come up a few times where we are being kind of clustered as part of a collective of new parties, notwithstanding the existing establishment. But there's this plethora of new parties that are coming into the system. What is it that this room thinks should be part of our differentiation journey? What should we be thinking about fundamentally in shaping our politics and our thinking, in bringing to the fore that differentiation that we seek? So I don't know if there's anyone. Yes, please, if you go for it.
Okay, good evening, colleagues. I think mine is just to probably link it to your question. I was going to make comments based on what has been said.
So Rabuti, just your name?
Oh, my name is Sean.
Sean,
Oh,
thank you.
yeah.
Thanks, Sean.
I just wanted to make comments on what has been said, probably linking to your question on how, or the comment that I raised on how do we differentiate ourselves from the others. I think I've picked up 3 things, and I think the first one was the speed on how we want things to be done. The current ruling party will want to be pat at the back after doing things after 10 years. So I think those are the kind of things that we need to be very strong on them. The speed that we will do things when we get into power. I think the second one is what Madam Chair said in terms of co-crafting our own constitution. The constitution that was crafted by Rolf Meyer and the current president, in some ways not working for all of us. So we need to co-craft our own. So those are the kind of things that probably we can try and raise or try and differentiate ourselves to them. And I think the third one is the question, how close are we to the country that we want to be? So if we can address those kind of things that we have put in that policy document, probably some of them, they will try and differentiate ourselves from the rest. Again, if there are other people who have suggestion how to differentiate ourselves, then we can come up with those. But I think those 3 or 4 things that I've just mentioned, we can try and put our foot on them. I think that we will be different if we can emphasize on those.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you. We've got a hand at the back, and then I'll come to the 2 gentlemen here.
My name is Bonile. I just want to say firstly, thank you to Mzansi leadership for coming up with real problems that as a country we are facing. I think we can talk about politics for the sake of talking politics, but what I've heard today, which is encouraging, is starting to talk about what South Africa's problems are, and what are the solutions that are related to the problems that we are facing. when it comes to differentiation, when it comes to politics, if you cast your eye back to 1994, when the ANC was elected into government, there was substance in politics. Your differentiation actually comes from having substance. And in today's politics, what you find is there's a lot of chaff that gets discussed all the time. But if we can be able to talk about the real issues, you look at Beki's presidency, people really understood as to what was the vision of the country. And if you can get out of the sort of like, okay, we are in politics for the sake of politics, it's much easier to differentiate yourself because you will have substantive issues to discuss. The other things that I wanted to talk about was around moral regeneration. Moral regeneration in terms of having core values that are defining who we are as South Africans. Values like integrity that are not being discussed at the moment. I think in your discussion, you talked about having Minister of Energy that has delivered 0 megawatts. There is no integrity in those politics. It's something that's quite clear. And if, as politicians, we are going to be talking around that as to, okay, what is it that this guy has achieved? And we're not talking about morals of people like that in terms of honesty, ethics, and things related to that. We are really missing the point. And when it comes to the general population, most people have really lost hope, as you were also talking about in your discussion, to say people are always thinking about what has happened now that is like the next catastrophic thing that we are going to see in the news. They are not talking about what is it that we are looking forward to as a country. You know, at some point we're talking about our GDP in terms of US dollars, and it was 300 billion around 1994, and we are still hovering around 400 million US dollars. And our aspiration as a country was to get to a point where we are over $1 trillion. But now we're talking about, okay, if in rand terms, it sounds like it's a lot of money, but we've lost a lot of value. But I think your presentation was very encouraging because it goes to the core issues as to if you are a country at a base, this is what you need to be. And if you are achieving, this is where you need to be. These are the aspirations that you should be having. I think that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonile. We've got a hand at the back. We do mail.
Thank you, everyone. I think, once again, to the point around differentiation, I think the beauty I find in our People's Manifesto process is, that linked to one of the sort of fundamental values that RISE is premised on, being integrity, is in this process of co-creating a People's Manifesto. We place ourselves in a position where, at the end of all of this, the consequence of this process, and I've said this before in a sort of prior engagement, where the outcome of that is a I guess political toolbook for around solutions, where we place South Africans in a sort of political position where they get to make political decisions, one, with their mind and also with their hearts, right? And I think integrity is the variable that closes that gap. Integrity and also strategic foresight and also capacity to implement, right? And I think that question around differentiation is one that I guess is difficult to respond to directly, because, at least from my perspective, would be inherently anecdotal, right? I could tell you why I'm involved in this organization, and that would be for the most part, the integrity of the leadership of the organization that I've encountered, the depth of skill and expertise in being able to resolve these sort of broad policy focuses and key reform priorities, and just solutioning around the crises that we experience as a country. But I think, in this kind of political climate where we are placed in, as voters, we're placed in positions where you have to make political decisions either with your head or with your heart. You might have, you might have political inclinations that are supported by one party, but they don't have the depth of skill or even the political will to invest in the implementability of those policies. So you're forced to make perhaps another political decision, more pragmatic decision around who can get the job done. I think the benefit and the beauty of co-creating a people's manifesto, where everybody has had collective input in determining and crystallizing, is an outcome where, like I said, you can make a political decision having married that those two ideas of what do I believe in and who do I believe can get things done. And I think that is, if I'm going to answer anecdotally around what makes this organization different, that would probably be my contribution. But yeah.
Thanks, Witumelo. We had two questions here.
Tumela, hey, this is a bit nerve-wracking. My name is Tam Sangma. My name is Masingi. So I love the presentation. I love the idea behind Rise Mzansi, right? And personally, I've been working towards getting more young people to meaningfully participate. Or do I need to move away?
Move closer,
closer.
so you're in frame.
I'm also scared of the camera. So what I love is, having a people-centric ideology or a concept, right? I believe that policy is essentially about people and how we shape the environment. And in terms of how do we differentiate ourselves, it's how about we deliberately, in our policies, prioritize people, right? Normally what we do is we prioritize issues, because policy is, in essence, is identification of issues and a plan around solving those particular issues. But we forget that the people, the issues, they have people behind them. So we can talk, our first priority is governance, our second priority is climate change. How about our first priority, and we stipulate it as people, and we unpack that and what it means for us as an organization, as an institution, so that it's deliberate in how we engage with constituencies, how we also look at representation. One of my key qualms, or one of the things I hate about our current democracy, sorry for using the word hate, is that you can't directly hold an elected representatives to account, right? I vote for a particular political party, and whoever is sent to parliament by that political party says, but me, I was sent by my party, right? So how do we also ensure that as a movement, representation, I can hold my leader account directly? If I've sent you before Rise, right? And this might be a point of contestation later on, because at some point we need to toe party lines, right? But how do I say that? I understand where Rise is trying to go. However, the people who voted for me said 1, 2, 3, and the party line is actually going against that. And how do we ensure that that particular representative is also protected within the organization? We've seen with DA, they'll tell you, vote with your conscience. But as soon as one of the members tries to do that, they'll get kicked out. It's only ANC that is being held to that particular standard. How do we ensure that we don't fall into the same trap, right? And secondly, how do we avoid being similar to Lusufi? Looking like we're doing something when we're not doing anything at all, right? Looking like we're listening, but we're not hearing the people. How do we incorporate the people and center people? My thing is, how do we then prioritize people and ensure that before anything, it's the people? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Tamsan.
Thank you, MC, and thank you, Mandla, for that presentation. My brother here talks about people. I think he...
Sorry, Putikama.
Oh, my name is Robert. Robert Mohalabone is my name. He nearly touched on the point that I wanted to talk about, which I think it might be missing, from Mandla's presentation. That is the people. South Africa is a very diverse country. And I did not see anything that talks to arts and culture in the policies. I think we need to take a stance. We need to take a stance on that, because the situation that we find ourselves in today, arts and culture, sports, does play a role in building character. In building, my brother there spoke about, moral regeneration. They do play a role. So we cannot, as an organization, completely disregard that important fact. Which takes me to the next important fact. They are linked. I'm sure this process is going to yield a very good document, a very good manifesto. How do we sell it to the people of South Africa? Do we have a strategy, a good political strategy to communicate our message that this is what we're selling, this is our vision? And that is also linked to, the psyche of a South African voter. How do you, get to them and say, this is what we are selling, and please come and work with us. Thank you.
How do you believe we should sell organization?
That's why I say, we can't disregard issues of arts and culture and, cultural, deep-seated cultural, beliefs. And South Africans are very expressive. For instance, I can give a song that, you can't have an event where you've got Black South Africans sitting without a song. It's just an example. So those are some of the things that we need to think deeply about as an organization and take a stance. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So I'll take one more comment, and then I'm gonna go back to the panel, and then we'll go back into the room. Noted at the back. I'll come back to you, Calvin.
Okay. Hi, I'm Gwande, and I wanted to just go back to looking at the policy. And I think that something I would like to see be added is a strategy regarding how we look at our central business districts. And I'm talking like traditional ones. So I think even for someone like me who doesn't have formalized expertise in urban development or urban planning, it's quite clear to see that money is draining from central business districts into, I guess, newer ones. So like in Joburg, we have Sandton, we have Umhlanga in Durban. And I think it's important that we do not completely forget these traditional central business districts. And I think some of the focus of promoting security and safety should be centered on these areas, because I think they present a good opportunity for things such as affordable housing that undoes the phenomenon of having people live far from economic centers. So if people who maybe would have lived in township areas as a result of apartheid planning can now move into affordable housing in CBD, which is much closer to where economic activity is, I think that's a big opportunity. And I think that promoting density as well also helps deal with things such as climate change, whereas people aren't having to travel so far to go to work. People don't produce as many or as much emission. So I think that is something that I would just like to be seen added as a strategy.
Thank you, Kwande. Kelvin, I'll come back when we do the second round. I just don't want to lose Sam. So I think just to offer the panel an opportunity to just respond generally to some of the comments and questions that have been raised.
Thank you. I mean, again, I won't make an attempt to respond to everything because I think people are making ideas and suggestions and inputs, and some of them I'm just noting, and these are things that we're just going to take into the work. I'll just respond to some things, and I'm definitely going to ask Vuyiswa to respond at the very least to your point around arts and culture and things we're doing in the movement, how we communicate our People's Manifesto. because I think and also I think it goes to differentiation, because the ground up, bottom up stuff we're doing, the communities, people are creating songs, they're creating videos. So I think she'll speak to that. I want to just speak to three things. One, Tamsanya, I love your point about, I think electoral reform, come to the political reform roundtable, engage in that work around the electoral system. Songeza is very passionate about it. We all are, but he's kind of the thought leader on that electoral reform question. But how do we measure results? In my view, if you think about State of the Nation address, it's become a laundry list of projects and amounts. I think every State of the Nation address, province address, city address should be about people, as you say. And we talk a bit in the longer discussion document about how do you measure progress. And I really think that the president should be prominent on the president's website, should be prominent in every State of the Nation address. Are South Africans more equal, more prosperous, more safe, living longer, better healthcare? This is what we should be reporting on as political leaders every year. And the reason measurement is important because it's an accountability mechanism. If I have to stand up every year and say that I regret that 25,000 South Africans lost their lives to murder last year, I don't want to say that same number every year or report a rising number every year. I want to be able to say we have reduced violent crime by 30% in the last year. So we need to, absolutely with you on people centricity, and I think as you're talking, I'm starting to have ideas about how we can better frame and communicate our policy work. Robert, arts and culture, can agree with you more. I think not just within the movement, but also it's an opportunity for us as South Africans. I think when we get into the economic section work, there are our traditional industries, and then there are new industries that we need to cultivate. I think the creative industries, which Tebogo is very passionate about and comes out of, is a huge opportunity for us as a country. You hear about places like Ibiza and, Afro-punk and Afro-Cella in Portugal, and what Ghana did with the Year of Return. We need to be thinking about how we create export industries off of our arts and culture. I mean, I grew up with a couple of young men that were family friends that are like my lighties, and they are now big people called major league DJs. And everywhere I go around the world, people are asking me about Amapiano in London, in New York, in UAE. That's a South African cultural export. So we need to think about how to unleash the creative talent, and particularly of our youth, and create really growing industries out of that. And sports, I mean, songs will talk your ear off about sports and create facilities and the importance of having arts, culture, recreation, and sports in every community. Kwande, I love your input, sir. I think we're definitely going to have a stream around spatial planning and reimagining our cities in a spatial environment. Fuiso comes out of the built environment. I think your point is spot on about CBDs. I have one of my pet things is that local government, I mean, part of being a mayor is you basically need to be a real estate developer. You are a operations person. You need to make sure everyone's trash gets picked up, everyone has water and electricity. You're running a bureaucracy of thousands of people, but one of your core responsibilities is to be a visionary. When you look at the great cities of the world, like Paris, some of these cities, there was some mayor 150 years ago who was a visionary about how they wanted that city to look and function. And to your point, I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the opportunities to regenerate our CBDs. You mentioned affordable housing. Absolutely. This is what the BRTs were supposed to, bus rapid transit was supposed to facilitate. But affordable housing, how do we create co-working spaces for young entrepreneurs? How do we have more spaces where young people can come in and have residencies and start businesses, receive business training and coaching and any number of things to really create more vibrancy in our CBDs, which of course, as you say, starts with security and safety. But I'll stop there. So please make sure we need to, Calvin and the team, we need to make sure we get this man plugged into our spatial planning work.
Thanks, Mandla.
So, yeah, I'm also not necessarily going to respond, but I want to just touch on the comment that was made about the need to focus on people. And again, I and maybe I'm reading too deep into this room, but I feel like these conversations tend to go very much into the intellectual space or the conceptual space. Politics is personal. It is a deeply personal endeavor that we are currently embarking on, ladies and gentlemen. And I am appealing to you to make it personal. This is not about other people somewhere else. This is about whether you or somebody you love could live or die on an operating table because of some stupid political decision that was made 10 years before they ever had an opportunity to even make that decision or contribute to that decision. This is about your personal safety. Whether the person who breaks into your house and violates your family will ever face justice and have the ability to do so because our justice system works or doesn't work. So I'm appealing to this room to get very personal about this exercise and recognize that what we are talking about here is not other people. It's not intellectual concepts. This is your future, your children's future, and the generations that will come after them. Many of us are descendants of people who were victims of forced removals. When you talk about apartheid spatial planning, we're not talking about ideological things. My family had property in Sophiatown, which they were uprooted from, put into a barren wasteland at that time called Soweto, and stripped of generations of wealth and the capability and capacity to create wealth going forward. And as such, many of us have to start our lives 100 years further back than many of our counterparts. And we face daily struggles that others don't exist. And it affects our ability as a country to adopt a sense of shared purpose and a sense of solidarity and a sense of common identity. So these are very deeply personal conversations. And this is why we choose to have them in this way, in this type of a forum, so that we can ventilate some of these topics in the hopes of making policy that actually means something to people and that touches people's lives and that allows us, Ndata Robert, to not have to then go and sell it to people. We are not in the business of selling policy to people. Policy must mean something. And when it means something and it resonates with the lived experiences that South Africans are dealing with on a daily basis, they know it, they hear it and they see it and they say yes. And if the things that come out of this room don't resonate with you and don't resonate with the people in your immediate life and circumstances, then we're having irrelevant discussions. So I'd really like to appeal to us to go there and to not over intellectualize these things. These are things we all know. I am a woman. I want to be able to walk out of this venue and go to the petrol station that is across the street in the full comfort that I can do so. I currently do not have that freedom. My basic freedom to walk across the street is infringed upon on a daily basis because we don't have a criminal justice system and a police service that works. These are daily personal issues. So I'm hoping that that's what we get out of this engagement. And certainly what I can say is out of many of the town halls that we've been to and the discussions we've had, those are the discussions that I had. And they are, people resonate not only with the things we sell them, because we don't sell things, but they resonate with the fact that, you know, we're finally able to have these difficult discussions. So I love what is being discussed, and I would just appeal to us to let's go in We are here for the next hour or two, and we want to walk away with some serious things that are going to help to propel this country forward. Sorry, Songs.
Thanks. Before
I don't think they're clapping for the next hour or two.
Songs, before you go, just from a process point of view, we have hit 8 o'clock. See, time flies when you're having fun. If you will allow us to continue for an additional 30 to 45 minutes, just so that we can really capture as much of this as possible. You know, to coordinate some of these things takes a really long time. So we don't want to lose the opportunity to have you in the room and take full advantage of the moment. So those who do need to leave, we do understand, but those who can stay, please sit with us. There's still another round of questions and comments that's coming around.
If there is some incentive to stay, there's dinner afterwards.
There we go.
All right. No, V's taken half of what I wanted to say out of my mouth. So I wanted to refer to what Michelle said earlier about wealth, because when we did some of the focus groups earlier on, a lot of people mentioned well-being actually, and in our conversations we did a lot of back and forth about well-being. So here's the practical consideration. There is normal political language that people are used to. There are all of these wonderful things that we want to talk about, like well-being and safety and all of these kind of things. And you think you've got to find people where they are and then move them to kind of the concepts that we're talking about, because new concepts can also sound like Latin and people don't know what the heck you're about. And so where we ended up is not just the idea of politics being personal, but centering the family, whatever structure it takes, and centering the community, and defining well-being not just in terms of the individual and their well-being, but the well-being of the family and the community as a whole. That takes you into the realm where you're addressing a lot of some of these issues that we're talking about. It was a deliberate choice to make an example about Sis Paulina's life and waking up at 4:30 to go to Melrose and go back and never have to be a parent. Because how many policy issues are in that story? There is spatial injustice, and therefore how you need to respond to it. There is quality of public transport, the cost of public transport, the cost of living, right? The quality of life in general. But there's also the question of who looks after her kids when she's not there. So how are we thinking about the concept of care? Because we don't think care is a thing that we need to do in a society, but it is children and elderly people. How do we take care of people? Do we have sporting facilities? How do we sustain community cohesion? Culture is essential in that. So what I'm trying to say is we thought if you take it beyond the individual and you go to the family, you go to the community, and you go to the nation, you're able to address a lot of things centered around the concept of well-being as a whole, because then you can think about it differently. But then, in the real world out there, people say you sound like an NGO. So, right? And the point is, part of what we have to do here in these conversations, and it's only the first one, is to find the language that is relatable. And the last thing I will say is, the great thing about our choice not to have stages and give long speeches and that sort of thing is that people, when you say people must share what's personally important to them, you get all sorts. And we've had insights into many issues which relate to the public health system, to criminal justice, and so on. Because people will tell you about a drug problem in the community and where it comes from. And you are able to diagnose in the conversation the 4 or 5 policy issues that are involved therein. So I want to echo what V is saying, to say sometimes we just need to describe and relate life. And in relating life, we get a sense of the things we need to change and how we change them. It becomes a much easier conversation without us feeling we need to say something super clever. in order to get somewhere. I'm not saying that's what you're trying to do, but sometimes we just need to be people and talk about our families and our communities and so on. Thank you. So the question I would ask is, what does the ideal, free, safe, and prosperous community look like? What does it have? What must it have as basics? Not just physical infrastructure, but the spirit and culture and so on in the community. What does that look like? Because then we are, Dr. Vincent, maybe beginning to redefine politics in a way, because we're talking about things people talk about with their family. Thank you.
Thank you, Songezo. All right, so we are going to do a last round. It's going to be a blitz. So we're going to, because I know this is the tail end. So all the people are going to feel confident now to go for it, which there's nothing wrong. So I see a lot of hands. Robert, you're going to go last because you are noted first. Lihlonololo will start there. Actually, no, point of order on myself. Let's start here. Kelvin was last in the first round. And then we'll go to Lihlonololo, and then we'll start noting at the back. Yes, I noted you, sir. Again, short questions, comments. Let's try to get as much as we can in the short space of time. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Calvin. I just wanted to, because the first few speakers prompted me quite a lot, and also to answer the question, really, and attempt to answer the question, how can we differentiate ourselves? I don't think, in my view, we really need to go anywhere further to really find why and how and things that really makes us different. We are a unique political party in the country, and no one in the country right now is doing what we are doing. First, we are for South Africa, really. Why and how? We disseminate information to the people freely. Information that other parties sit in they call them committees, branch committees and all that, you know. They caucus, they talk about things, whether it's a region, they talk about problems of the region as a party, and then go into the government and then do implement that, which, you know, they have talked as 10, 15 people and all that. In Rise Mzansi, we are sharing the information with everyone. Pretty much anyone can really access our information. We do not have a group of people all over the country called Rise Mzansi Committee that decides things that are, you know, affecting the community. We are asking the community to come and really be the ones that are dealing with their own set of issues as a community. So for that is a very powerful tool, because, you know, political parties the world over are very much afraid of a wise voter. And we are giving voters freedom and wisdom, because we are giving them information, we are making them connect the reason why they don't have water when they open their tap. Right now, many in the country right now, they don't understand why they don't have water, because they are not really involved in that type of, you know, discussion. But we are then blowing this thing open to make them understand the reason why they don't have water when they open their tap, and the fact that they have to understand that this is their right and they are already been paying for it and all that. So Rise Mzansi is unique in that sense that we are really for the people and we love South Africa, and we don't do politics like other people are doing politics. Just that, you know, the few first speakers made me think about it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Lihlonololo Mokhema. And I think where I want to start is first to congratulate the National Leadership Committee in a very short space of time. And maybe what people don't understand is that you are volunteering still as part of the movement. So how that leads into my story is that a solid story has been built. A solid story is emerging, whether you're thinking about politically from a policy perspective, intellectually, the story is making sense, and we do have that source of wealth in terms of the way that we tell our story and how it's becoming cohesive. But who are we telling that story to, right? If South Africa was a persona, how would we describe that person? What are the characteristics of this person? And I would dare say that it is somebody who's been dehumanized over time. Through colonial times, the impact of apartheid and what the ANC government has done in its rule over the past 3 decades or so. So, you know, poverty is crushing, is dehumanizing. Unemployment is crushing, is dehumanizing. And therefore, I think in terms of the question around being different, what's going to make us really succeed and stand out in the end is how we rehumanize that South African persona through the work that we're doing. I think that's the work of our generation, to rehumanize the South African society that's been dehumanized. Thanks.
Thank you, Hlonoro. For ease of process, I'm just going to go there, and then we'll just swing back.
Okay. Hi, my name is Irene, and I, being disabled myself, I think it is very important to recognize voters or potential voters that are often forgotten, and that I think the disability community is one such group. So consider how it can be ensured that these voters go to the ballot with general ease, and then I think you'll have a supporter for life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. Yeah, we can swing to. Sorry, Vuso, you had a question, right? Yeah, let's just cover this side and then we'll come back.
Thank you very much, everyone. I think for me, a few things that I've heard that have made me very happy. One was the discussion about substance. That's a good thing to differentiate you. The other one was the one that really attracted me to be a volunteer in Rise Mzansi, which is the values that Mzansi has and the morals. And this gentleman talked about moral regeneration. And I would like us to maybe just think about that in terms of what does that mean and how do you actually do it? Because if we want to do something different and be different from the other offerings, we have to be seen as good leaders and good abantu abathunyiweyo, people that you've sent. So I don't have an answer to that in terms of what does moral regeneration mean and how do you practically do it. It's not a question for today, it's just something that we need to think about. And lastly, Okwande spoke about it. That's one thing today, walking out from here, I'm quite passionate about spatial planning. So he spoke about something quite powerful. I just wanted to add that, you know, in most cities around South Africa, government already owns land in well-located places. And one of the things that we should talk about is how do we use that land to address some of the questions that Usongas was speaking about, the lady waking up at 4, leaving
right at the back.
Hi, my name is Pierre. I'll try to make this personal. I am a foreigner. I moved here in 1998 because I believed in the Rainbow Nation. I believed in the new South Africa and its opportunities. I'm married to a South African now, and I choose to live here. But not a day goes by where I don't think about how my wife's going to get her French passport and maybe we'll need a way to get back to France and whether we should do it or not. Now I'm here because I'm curious. I'm here because I'm wondering if there's an alternative and another option for South Africa. And First, I'd like to thank you for the inspiration. I think the values you're proposing, I think the plan feels like a plan to get back on track to where what South Africa should have been and where it can still go. And for that, I feel inspired. But I also want to challenge you. I think it's not enough. I think that for RISE to be different, for South Africa to have a chance, we need to move from intentions to competence, to actions. And that plan for South Africa needs to allow the people of South Africa to play a part in it. We have a huge youth that's unemployed, unskilled in many cases. What is their part in your plan or our plan? How do they contribute? When people go to vote, what does the 100-day look like? What does 365-day look like? What does 5 years look like? And what is each person's role in South Africa to play in that? I think if we're able to answer that, if you're able to answer that, then it will give a reason for people to vote. If you're not able to answer that, then there's no difference between RISE and COPE and every other party.
Thanks, Pierre. Yolisa.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us, RISE team. I will try and be brief, but it is quite a lot as I think slower. So I'm not a riser yet, and I'm on the fence, and some of my contributions will allude to that, why that is. But that said, kudos on everything that the team has done, leadership demonstrated. I take my hat off you, especially with given the time. I think for me, I've just spent 3 months at home in KZN, and I think it was a rude awakening, and I was coming from a study sabbatical, so to just land back into Kasi lifestyle when you haven't been there for a long time. It almost shook me to my, in terms of what is truly South Africa for the majority. And I think it was a rude awakening I needed because I also come from a professional background. This is my life. So there is a real disconnect. And I think we should be alive to that disconnect, even in our connectivity to home. And one of the things that, and we've been battling this out with Tebogo is, and I struggle with it, when I looked at the vision, I'm just like, I could be anywhere in the world, and I could have been in Brazil, I could have been in Hungary, like that vision would have been presented. So what is it about that vision that is speaking to, Uvuiso was mentioning earlier, the dispossessed descendant that I am, like I'm a descendant of dispossessed generations. So for me, it's almost like a shock to my system that I'm not seeing the word just, because I don't think we've arrived yet. And I think justice for me, yes, is a value, but I also think it's something that should underpin whatever you do, and it should also be a goal, and a goal we ought not to remember is this country, given our context and where we come from. So that's one thing I was just, there's something about the vision where I'm like, am I in SA Inc? Because I think the preconditions of prosperity and unity that's in the vision surely should be justice, because there's an outstanding business that South Africa has. And I worry about an ahistorical posture, even though I know a vision is aspirational, but I think in this existing generation's lifetime, we cannot afford an ahistorical posture. And then secondly, I know we were saying that we shouldn't intellectualize things. I do believe in ideology. I think the world we're trying to change today has been built on ideas. And I think it's important that whatever we build, that we are clear about what those ideas are. And I again salute the team. So there's a stance that's put on paper, social democratic stance. Sorry, I'm looking down, I'm not looking up because I've got my notes. And there's something immediately for me, if you say social democratic, concerning that the unfinished business of 94, I'm an 80s generation, if you're an 80s generation, unfinished business of 94 is economic emancipation for Black people. I don't care what you say in my lifetime. Maybe people behind me will solve other things, but as an 80s generation, I feel that is my generational mission. And so when I look at the word social democrats, I get excited. And then when I look at the market economy stuff, I'm like, this sounds liberal, and I say this because I understand we need growth, but how you grow matters. And I've worked in shared value and tried to do this work. It's difficult when you're working in an economic system that was never designed to be inclusive and never was designed for a certain kind of person. And I hear us prioritizing Black entrepreneurs. I'm like, we don't also want to change the face of inequality, because that's what happened in 94 again. So, and whilst my thinking on this, and if you challenge me on what's the alternative, I can't present to you now because it's work in progress. But if we truly say RISE is an alternative and RISE is not orthodox, there's new thinking that's emerging, heterodox thinking. And I think we've got NGOs here in the country that are working on, like, actively on how do you actually work in a different system. Because one of our salients, which is land reform, some people have touched on it. It's a surprise again to me that it's not featuring as a vehicle to actually get us to an economically just SA, because we know what sits behind property rights. We know that property rights have built nations, have built wealth. And I'm just like, if 80% of the property was stolen, that like, and we've barely shifted that reality, what is then, like, how does RISE contribute to that? Because it is a key point of conversation. And sorry, I was talking about, sure. Yeah, anyways, land justice. So there is something about land justice that it's a surprise that it's not featuring as part of the Economic Justice Pact. And then I think lastly, I was just going to speak about the intercontinental potential. I didn't see that coming through. So I was thinking about whether we have any thoughts around that. Yeah, but yeah, colleagues, I think, lastly is, I think policy is a values conversation. I think policy is an ideological question. So it's just how it manifests. So I do think that if we are true to the idea, then it's going to come through through on the policies that we're trying to implement.
Thank you. Two. Thank you, Yoliswa. Yes, go for it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lolo Maka, and I'd like to thank not only the National Leadership Collective, but everyone here. This has been inspiring. This has been rejuvenating. You know, you go to work every day, it's quite crushing, but when you get into these conversations, it can really just rejuvenate your soul and get you going again. So I want to just make a quick contribution, just to somewhat address the question that Sonia's arose regarding what is the conditions, basic conditions required for a good society, and some of the questions that arose regarding moral regeneration. So these are issues that I've thought about a lot as well. And one idea that has crept into my mind quite a bit is something called statecraft as soulcraft. Now, I don't mean this literally.
Sorry, just say that slower.
Statecraft, so governance, as soulcraft, changing the people. And I believe ultimately our effort needs to be dual in that sense. And I mean in this way, it's not a literal statement, it's more figurative. The social ills in our society, they cannot be solely remedied by improvements in standards of living. And what I sort of use as a basis for that, there are poorer societies than us that don't have the kind of terrible social ills that we are grappling with every single day in this country. Why is that? Why is that? And I ask myself that question all the time. And I thought about the idea that, you know, apartheid was an intentional effort to destroy people. Now we need to be intentional in developing people once again. It's not only developing our economy, our society, but our people. This means developing a culture, a behavior that is conducive to equal, prosperous, safe, and united. And I thought about a gentleman named Lee Kuan Yew who spoke about something like this. And he said, you know, when they were developing Singapore, the easy part was getting the infrastructure in place, the railroads, the bridges, and all that stuff. The hard part was developing the people for that infrastructure. We got to be intentional in our efforts to achieve that dual goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mama. Thank you. I think this is the last one.
Yeah, thank you, MC. Chairperson, I think I might have, used the wrong word there when I used the word sell. Well, I have to admit, English is not our first song, but I think maybe the more let's not maybe focus too much on semantics. I think maybe the more appropriate word would have been, how do we resonate? How do we connect with our people? And another thing that I just wanted to, I live in Ward 69, by the way. It's Melville, Auckland Park, Coronationville, Sophia Town. During my spare time, I organize. And one of the things that I enjoy doing, it's organizing in disadvantaged communities. We've got 2 informal settlements there. Kathrada Park, I spend most of my time there talking about this organization. And there is also Slovo Park. I spend most of my time, I think areas where it is said that, they traditionally belong to some political parties. I go there and talk to people. I think already we have volunteers. We have some presence there. So I don't think it would be entirely true to say, some of us come here and over-intellectualize things. I came to a policy conference, and unfortunately, you cannot avoid theory and practice. You can't.
Thanks,
So
Robert.
I felt that, sometimes I think, we deviated from the issue and, dealt with the man over a misunderstanding. But those are some of the things that I just wanted to maybe the issue of a political strategy maybe maybe does not belong to a policy these policy discussions. Maybe such kind of things belong in organizing and strategy and campaigns. I might have brought that. Maybe it does not fit in this kind of discussions. I don't know, but it's for us to see how we proceed with this kind of discussions. Thank you, Chairperson. I just wanted to, to clear that misunderstanding. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. We are 2 minutes to 8:30. So I'm going to just ask closing remarks. I'll actually start with Vuiswa, and then I will come to Mandla, and then Songezo, and then we'll come to a close.
I don't have much to say except to thank you all for your inputs. I think that we've had some very good inputs, and it's important for us to have these discussions continuously. So as Songs had said, I don't think this is the last one. Hopefully, I mean, some of your faces are very familiar, and hopefully we'll be seeing more of you in future and further discussions. And when you have different voices in the room, you tend to also have different types of discussions. So it is worthwhile attending more of them, and let this not be the last one. And I really do appreciate, all the comments, especially the ones where, items that we haven't maybe necessarily either discussed extensively, thought of, or included in our documents have been highlighted, because it certainly makes it richer for the process of our own sort of internal deliberations, discussions, and of course the process of policy making. And Dr. Richard, I definitely was it. Sorry, not
Robert.
Dr. Richard. Sorry, Robert. It really wasn't. I wasn't making a comment about the word selling. It was really about saying, reiterating the fact that this is a collaborative process, and it's a process that we're undertaking with South Africans, not for South Africans, and not to try and create some magic bullet solution that South Africans will hopefully then buy into. We want to build this country, and our vision statement is very clear about the one generation thing. It's not a quick solve. It's not an easy task. There's going to be a lot of messiness. This is a messy country with a messy history. We recognize that. And as we craft that future, we need to get comfortable with getting into some of that messiness and debating it constructively with each other in this manner. So I'm very energized by this evening. I'm very energized by the nature of the discussions, and I hope we'll have more of them in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Wisa.
First, I just want to thank everyone for your deep engagement. This is work. This is going to require us, all of us, to work together to build the country that we deserve. So I appreciate you putting in the work by coming today, engaging with the documents, and sharing. I think we're going to succeed to the extent to which we can tap in to South Africa's collective genius. And I think this room is just a microcosm of the collective genius at the nation's disposal. I'm going to ask you all to be a little bit patient with us. This was a starting point, not really even the presentation, but the discussion document, if anything, was a starting point. It was not by no means a definitive answer. So, Kemet was not built in a day. So please bear with us and help us. Bring your bricks, to the extent that no one knows how the pyramids were built. So, but we do know it took a lot of people. So please bring your bricks. I do want to say, among the many differences between us and the status quo, not just the ruling party, but the whole political status quo. First of all, I love that you, Pierre, I think you mentioned competence. Competence matters to us. In fact, our national organizer said something you'll rarely hear a politician say. He said, I cannot be Minister of Economy. I don't believe I'm that person that South Africa needs. We need people who understand if you cannot do the people's business in a particular role, if it's not for you, step aside. There are people that it's fine. We love you, we appreciate you, but our goal is not positions. Our goal is to do the people's business. So under a rising Mzansi government, we're not going to be looking only among our volunteers, our members, or whoever, our leadership. We're going to look at what does South Africa need? And those are the people that we need. So we're going to tap into all of South Africa's brilliance and capacity, not only our own. Two, I think one of the things that turns South Africans off is they can see that in our politics right now, the interests of the party come before the interests of the country. And for Rise Mzansi, it's non-negotiable that we'll make decisions based on what is right for South Africa and South Africans' well-being, not for our personal well-being. And finally, and the last thing, and that this is the project that we're all in together, is we're building a modern political movement. And by modern, I just mean fit for purpose today. What does South Africa need today? What type of political movement or party will best serve the interests of South Africa today? That is the challenge, and that's the project, and that's what we need to build together. Pierre, I'm in this, part of the reason I'm in this, I've traveled around the world, and it's interesting. You'll be in a place like the United States, and you meet someone from Haiti, from certain countries, Somalia. We talk about this failed state concept, and it's real. There are people who are like, I went to a university called Howard University. There was a security guard there. You'll find taxi drivers. A guy drove me to campus, like 18, 19 years old, Nigerian guy. It's a PhD from Howard. It's like, I got my books. I've written books on politics. Let me show you my books. Congolese guy that was the security guard at Founders Library, has a master's degree. The head of African kind of studies. He's like, do you know who this guy is? They talk on his way in and out of his office every day. He's like, you see a security guard, this guy is a scholar. People from countries where like they cannot achieve their aspirations in their countries. And they've gone halfway around the world, not out of choice, not for a project, not because they fell in love, but because they cannot fulfill their human potential in the land of their birth. I refuse for that to happen to South Africa. Yoliswa, economic growth, inclusion, and justice. relative obscurity, has found its mission, and we must either fulfill it or betray it. And I intend to fulfill it in this generation. This is for me a 10-year project. I'm in this thing for minimum 10 years. There are some chances that like, oh, ANC is vulnerable. Let's start a party. There's an election next year. Maybe we'll get something. That's not what we're in this for. I'm in this thing for 10 years. And so I would say we have between now and fourth quarter, we have a year to craft a vision, a plan, to Pierre's point, and to your point, you listen to many of the people in this room, a vision that resonates with a plurality of South Africans, that gives them the confidence that we are going to collectively achieve this mission to build the South Africa we deserve. And it's not just a market economy. Read the discussion document, a social market economy. And let's engage on what that means. You talk about social democracy. I came across an interesting quote this week as I was wading through, refreshing what does social democracy means. There's a quote, it's often associated with the quote, the market is an excellent servant, but a terrible master. We are not neoliberal. We want to harness the power of the market. China pulled 300 or 400 million people out of poverty, harnessing the market. We want to harness the market to give South Africans productive opportunities to generate livelihoods, but the market will not be our master. And we do not see the market as a thing that exists outside of political and social values and governance. Lola will talk. I love your framing. We'll talk more, but I just wanted to give you the shout out.
Thanks, Mandla.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to be very quick because I think it's Yolisa. Yolisa's input kind of reminded me to go and have a look. And I think as something that, and we said at the beginning of this document that it's an offering for contributions to be made. But I'll just read 3 paragraphs from it. So say justice is elevated to the center of our thinking because it is rooted in the preamble of our constitution, the SA Constitution. It is because we accept that we are a society shaped by injustice, dispossession, and oppression in both the colonial and apartheid eras. We also recognize that there are many other injustices that continue to oppress South Africans today, such as racism, sexism, misogyny, and homophobia, among others. These need ethical, social, statutory, and policy responses to ensure that we eventually achieve a truly equitable society. It is in this context that we advocate for and will, as part of the People's Manifesto process, expand on the pursuit of justice. We will widen the scope of justice and redress to include social, economic, spatial, land, and climate justice, among others. That's your invitation. And yes, we have centered justice. And it's not just a response to you. I think it's an injunction to all of us, because Yolisa is right, that with the history that we have, with the present that we have, we must recognize that one of the reasons non-racialism has lost its meaning, it's because it is not founded on justice. And it's not just justice in superfluous terms. We need to have very specific measures and timelines for achieving economic justice. So for those of us who maybe haven't gone through everything that we've written, please do, because some measures may appear to be academic, but if you don't give a target and a name to what you need to do to achieve justice, chances are you're not going to do it. You'll always just talk about it. But thank you very much. Yolisa is right. Justice, justice, justice. In our country, with our history and the future that we want to build. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, Rise champions, leaders, thank you very much for what has been a fruitful first engagement. One of the things that we are centering our politics around is seriousness. The character of seriousness is about how serious do we take our politics and how serious do we take this process of contributing to a future that we deserve. And so, lots of people ask us, why are you taking so long to have a position on Ukraine and Russia? Why are you taking so long to have a position on BRICS? And the reason for that is we believe in the idea of triangulating thought and practice and getting to a broader collective of ideas that people have a vested interest in. We're not going to be rushed by people's need for us to have answers to complex questions. And so when we talk about the People's Manifesto process, it is something that we are nailing our colors on the mast because we believe it's a process that's going to yield the best possible result. We know that there are time pressures and that there's an election to be fought. September 2023, we want to be at a point where we've canvassed a broad, collective of people, including yourselves and others. And by then judge us based on what we then bring out and offer to the nation. In between that process, we are galvanizing and organizing different people from all, sectors of society. And we implore you and ask you to help us in that process. Our concept around the power of 8 is we ask each one of you to go out there and find 8 or 7 other people who can help us propel and push this journey forward. It's important that we do that so that we build a critical mass that will justify the process that we say we are embarking on. This must not be a waste of time. It must be a validation of a new way of doing politics. So please help us protect this idea of broad consultation, but there must come a time when we've got ideas and a plan. And once we've got that, we must hit the ground running with force, with focus, and with discipline and commitment and with seriousness. So thank you so much. We would love to invite you for some dinner in the food area, just to connect and put something in our tummies and continue to have a conversation. Please do continue to interact with Mandla and the team. We want to hear your voices, but we also want to access your knowledge and expertise in the areas that you are well known for. So thank you very much. I also just want to thank our technical teams who sit here for long hours watching us do the building of South Africa. Let's not forget and treat those who are unseen as underserved. Let's always be mindful, not only of the work that we will do, but of the work that we do on a daily basis. It's important that we live our values, not in the future, but in the now. Thank you very much and have a good evening. Thank you.